Good morning and or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this Derasat session or webinar on German soft power policy in the Middle East. I would like to first of all thank all those for attending and thank the participants or the speakers whom I'll be introducing shortly. I'd like to begin with a short introduction. In the Middle East, we're used to you talking about American foreign policy, British foreign policy, French foreign policy, for a variety of reasons. Most importantly, these are kind of, in the case of the UK and France, they obviously colonized or had significant imperial interests in the region. Now, these countries differ from Germany in two important senses. The first is that Germany generally has a much more difficult foreign policy position than the countries like the UK and the US. Not so much France, but certainly the UK and the US, which are islands, or in the case of the US, has massive bodies of water defending it. Germany has land borders with many countries and has been at war with many of these countries throughout the last 2,000 years, and this creates a much more precarious and constrained foreign policy environment than is typically faced by a country such as the UK. The second difference is that Germany was defeated in World War II, and this has imposed additional constraints on its foreign policy instruments in terms of its ability to use hard power in a way that the UK and the US and other countries have been able to use. I recently read a book, which I strongly recommend, called Upheaval by Jared, I forget his last name. But this book talks about, it's ostensibly about 7 crises which various countries around the world have gone through and how they adapted to those crises. And one of the countries studied is Germany. And it's provided me with some fascinating background on Germany, and specifically after World War II, the division between the West and East. It's the first time I realized that who Konrad Adenauer is, and he's going to be represented, or at least his legacy is going to be represented today by Mr. Fabian Bloomberg, who's from Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. And he was the first West German chancellor. And German foreign policy, as I read through this book, evolved massively during the post-war era from, for example, a situation under Adenauer where Germany was not recognizing many of the countries in Eastern Europe, most importantly Eastern Germany, to Willy Brandt in the 60s and 70s, who paved the way for German unification, which we saw in the 90s under Helmut Kohl. And German people have also had a very different sense of nationalism to what we used to in countries such as the UK and the US, which we're used to dealing with. And that's also evolved. When I've spoken to Germans personally, they've told me that even 2006, when the World Cup was hosted by Germany, this actually marked an important time in the evolution of Germany's sense of nationalism. And this all has important implications for the foreign policy and how it's articulated and what its goals are. At this stage, I would like to introduce our 3 speakers whom we're very glad are participating today. The first is Ambassador Kai Beckmann, who's the ambassador of Germany to the Kingdom of Bahrain, and he's been the ambassador since 2018. He joined the Federal Foreign Service in 1994 and has been stationed in several roles in Egypt, Italy, Argentina, and Jericho, with administrative roles at the FFO between those missions. He studied law at Passau University in Germany and King's College London, followed by legal traineeship in Hamburg. My second guest is Mr. Jan Hanrath, who is the CEO and co-founder of CAPO, which is the Center for Applied Research in partnership with Orient, which is a think tank focusing on the Middle East. He studied political science, European law, and psychology at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and he currently writes his PhD thesis on German public diplomacy in the Middle East. And our third guest is Mr. Fabian Bloomberg, who is the regional representative to the Gulf states at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. And he'll be giving us some more context on exactly what the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is and how that differs from a civil society organization such as CAPO. During his career, he's worked as KIS's representative to Pakistan, the assistant to the Secretary General and Deputy Head of the Executive Office of CAS, and is an advisor to the Department of Strategies and Planning at the CDU, Christian Democrats Union headquarters. He's also served as an assistant to Professor Dr. Jürgen Rittgers, former Minister President of North Rhine-Westphalia, and as a speechwriter for the chairman and the honorary chairman, Dr. Hans-Gert Pöttering. Before we commence, I would also like to provide two notes. The first is that we strive for diversity in all of our events, and it's something that all of the organizations participating today consider a priority. Much as we strive, we were unable, unfortunately, on this occasion to have a more gender diverse panel, but this is something we will always strive to do in our events, and we hope that future events, like our past events, will have more gender representation. The additional note I would like to express is that although Messrs. Bloomberg and Hanrath are going to be on the record, our guest, His Excellency Ambassador Bergman, is going to be speaking off the record. So for journalists, especially who are attending, please do not treat, please treat Ambassador's comments as off the record, but feel free to quote what Mr. Hanrath and Mr. Bloomberg say as you wish. And with that, I would like to first give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Beckman to discuss a little bit about the German foreign policy in the Middle East and what its goals are and what are the key elements of this Middle Eastern strategy. Thank you. You have 10 minutes, Ambassador Beckman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omar. I'm very grateful to Derasat for organizing today's webinar and putting the focus on Germany's foreign policy towards this region. This is indeed a very timely initiative coming shortly after a new German government has taken office in December last year. Of course, all three parties which are represented in the new government have held government office before, and actually all foreign ministers of the last decades had been representatives of one of the three parties now forming the government coalition. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is the first female foreign minister, but also the second foreign minister member of the Green Party in Germany's history. You can therefore expect many elements of continuity, but also some fresh ideas. What is new in German foreign policy is an even stronger focus on climate protection and energy transition. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs now holds the responsibility for international climate negotiations and diplomacy, previously with the Federal Ministry for the Environment. This new focus offers chances for climate partnerships and increased cooperation with the countries of this region. Germany will make its best efforts to replace the import of fossil fuels with the import of green hydrogen. And solar energy, tidal power, wind power are all available in this region. A new, and I'm very grateful for Dr. Omar's remarks on diversity, and maybe unusual aspect for some is the emphasis on a feminist foreign policy as already pursued by Canada or Sweden. The principle is very simple. It's about equal representation, it's about rights, and it is about resources. As long as one half of the population is not equally participating, is not sufficiently represented, or is not being paid on an equal footing, much remains to be done in Germany, in this region, and in many others. And of course, as you mentioned, this is also a challenge for us as exclusively male panelists today. And so I hope for some female input from the audience. The MENA region is a core priority for the German foreign policy because of its immediate proximity to Europe, and because strategic challenges such as climate, migration, terrorism, energy, obstacles to trade, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic cannot be addressed without a close partnership with our neighbors in the MENA region. And we are currently witnessing profound change in the MENA region, but also conflicts which for years or even decades have remained unresolved. We strongly welcome all initiatives for more regional dialogues, such as recently within the Gulf Cooperation Council. And we especially welcome the normalization of the relations between several countries from the region and Israel, among them very prominently the Kingdom of Bahrain. And we hope that these new channels of dialogue will give new impetus to resolving the Middle East conflict based on a negotiated two-state solution, which in our view represents the only possible outcome. Instability, though, is still a threat in the region, and the GCC is like an island of stability that is surrounded by a region of instability and violence. We remain concerned about Iranian destabilizing activities in the region, including the use of ballistic missiles inconsistent with relevant UN resolutions, as well as the transfer of missile technology and UAVs to regional proxies. And we are convinced that enhanced regional dialogue and a return to mutual compliance with the JCPOA would benefit the entire Middle East, allow for more regional partnerships and economic exchange with long-lasting implications for growth and the well-being of all people there, including in Iran. And we are addressing, I would like to stress this, these challenges not alone or single-handedly, but in close coordination with our partners. The German commitment to European integration and the European Union has not changed with the new federal government. If anything, it is stronger than ever. And in view of shifts in the global balance of power, we strongly believe that Germany can only remain capable of taking action through a strong EU and by working with its European partners. We are therefore committed to closer European cooperation, especially on the EU's common foreign and security policy. And the particularly close cooperation between Germany and France is to serve as a force for European integration. Today, President Macron will be received by Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin. And we encourage a stronger focus of the European Union on the Gulf region and expect closer cooperation between the EU and the GCC with a broad agenda in the following months. As for the UK, following its decision to leave the EU, we are committed to a good relationship in a spirit of partnership. And of course, alongside European integration, the transatlantic partnership remains a cornerstone of German foreign policy. The US, also as seen in the recent meeting between our new foreign minister and State Secretary Blinken, remain Germany's closest ally outside Europe, especially in the framework of NATO. What are then the tools with which we address these challenges? How much of it is soft power? How much hard power? And I'm grateful to Derasad for highlighting the concept of soft power in this context. Soft power is, of course, mainly an analytical concept of political science. If you search the website of the German Foreign Office, you will find no mention of this term. Joseph Nye made it popular in 1990, and he defined it as to get the other side to want what you want instead of ordering it to do what you want. And I find this is actually quite an accurate definition of what diplomats often strive to do. It seems, therefore, that soft power instruments remain indispensable in foreign relations, and therefore also, of course, for the foreign policy of Germany in the MENA region. And it should be no surprise that Germany, after the disastrous experiences of 2 world wars initiated by Germans in the first half of the last century, which you mentioned, has opted for a strong role for diplomacy and soft power, actually long before the theoretical concept of soft power had been developed by Nye. Importantly, in the cultural field, the Goethe Institute has established cultural bridges worldwide, and especially with the countries of this region. It has brought the German language closer to generations of students, as have thousands of partner schools worldwide, which teach German as a foreign language or even offer education according to a German curriculum. And universities in many countries collaborate with German universities or even offer a university education according to German standards, as in Egypt, Jordan, and the Sultanate of Oman. And here in Bahrain, our embassy for over a decade has been offering German language courses in cooperation with the Goethe Institute Gulf region. And we are organizing cultural events like the German Gulf Film Festival in November last year together with the Goethe Institute. Another soft power instrument accentuated by the role of social media public diplomacy has gained importance over the last decades. One of the soft power tools implemented by Germany in this region has been the establishment of a German information center for the Arab world in Cairo, which is headed by a German regional spokesperson on foreign policy fluent in Arabic, Dr. Dennis Kumitat. You can follow his tweets on Natiq Almani. And we feel that when it comes to political positions, many people only have a very general notion of what German foreign policy actually stands for. And that is why we upgraded the German Information Center in Cairo and introduced an Arabic language spokesperson. As German embassy in Manama, we engage with our followers in Bahrain through our Instagram account, Germany in Bahrain, and also through my Twitter account at Germany Bahrain. When soft power is debated today, it is sometimes under the heading, in today's world, soft power is not enough. What generally is meant by this is that soft power instruments should be complemented, at least in certain situations, by economic and military power. In fact, German foreign policy does not exclude the deployment of military power, provided these are the constitutional constraints, that it is with a parliamentary mandate and within a framework of mutual collective security and in accordance with its rules. But there are several examples also from the region. In Iraq, the German forces have participated since 2015 in the global coalition against Daesh's Operation Inherent Resolve. This mandate will have to be renewed by Parliament by the end of this month. In addition, Germany is involved in several UN missions in various regions, such as the UNIFIL Maritime Task Force in Lebanon, where we lead the maritime component of the mission. In all this, we favor an integrated approach encompassing also civil society. And in a general foreign policy review, then Foreign Minister Steinmeier, who is now our federal president, has introduced a full new directorate at the Federal Foreign Office that is concerned with preventing crises, managing conflicts, and building peace. The focus is not only on management of severe crises, but also on effective prevention to keep crises from arising in the first place. The Federal Foreign Office supports projects and measures by German and international NGOs that seek to manage current conflicts, prevent potential conflicts, and stabilize the situation following conflict. To sum up, yes, what we could define as soft power instruments play a central role in German foreign policy. They are, however, not the only tools in the foreign policy toolkit. An essential element of our foreign policy is European commitment, as well as our commitment to multilateralism. There, very often, we have the Kingdom of Bahrain as a strong partner in multilateral initiatives, and our policy towards the Middle East is characterized by a long-standing engagement. With the new government in Germany, there are practical opportunities for climate and energy partnerships, specifically with countries of the region. With this, I hand back to Dr. Omar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that overview, which I'll remind any journalists attending is off the record. Next, I would like to move to our colleague, Mr. Fabian Bloomberg, who represents the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Now, one thing notable is that he's in the regional office of this entity, and I don't think there are any think tanks in the Gulf that have a regional office anywhere. So this is an alien concept that needs to be explained to many of the viewers today. So, and as well as the relationship between why does this think tank have the name of a former chancellor of West Germany? So, with that, please, Mr. Bloomberg, you have 10 minutes to enlighten us.
Well, thank you very much, Omar. I give my very best. But first of all, let me cordially thank you and also the friends at Derasat for setting up this panel and also for including perspectives as such from CAS and from CARPO. It gives us an opportunity to introduce ourselves and me to, as you asked, to elaborate a bit on our role in Germany's foreign policy, the relationship between foundations such as the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the German government, and also to sketch out our goals as a regional office I'm representing today. I can build on a point that also Ambassador Böckmann highlighted in his remarks, and this is the will of German foreign policy to establish and to strengthen relations that are built on trust and on dialogue. And this is the first element, I would say, of the manifold roles we as German foundations play, or let's say one of the major tasks of us. So the German foundations are an advocate of dialogue. So they facilitate a dialogue-oriented German foreign policy approach. So we deliver platforms for the exchange of ideas and knowledge transfer. And in the case of CAS, we do this since more than 50 years. And by doing so, we try to contribute to a better understanding between different cultures in a globalized world. We build partnerships and networks in the region and between Germany, Europe, and foreign countries in the region. And how do we do this? We operate with field offices in more than 100 countries worldwide. So we are present on the ground, and we always work with partners from the respective countries on the ground. So we focus on long-term sustainable cooperation with partners and multipliers from society, from politics, and also from science institutions. And with this structure of field offices, of regional offices and networks, I think we can offer three added values to the German foreign politics. First is a broad range of expertise, both abroad, but also at home in Germany and Europe. And we can offer access to decision makers from the most varied political and societal backgrounds. CAS, for example, sees itself as a networking hub with close connections to stakeholders, such as members of government and administration, parliamentarians, as well as professionals from academia, from think tanks, business, and the media. The second advantage, I would say, of such a structure is that we can cultivate respectful relationships as we take the cultural context and the needs of each country into account. And we don't interfere, but we work in partnership. So we are there when another country invites us to work with the country. And third, we play also a role as a seismograph for new developments. And on that basis, we can deliver analysis, political assessments, conduct expert discussions, provide food for thought via dialogue with politicians and experts, and offer settings in which analysis and expert advice is possible. Again, abroad and at home in Germany and Europe. And to put this a bit into perspective and to become a bit more concrete, I would focus a bit more on the region and give you a few examples maybe of our work as a regional offices focusing on the Gulf states. Ambassador Bergmann already sketched out the key elements and the background of German foreign policy positions. Let me briefly maybe touch upon our perception of the situation and how this also shapes our objectives as CAS and how we contribute to German foreign policy. So over the past few years, we witnessed fundamental changes in the region in regards to security, stability, and economy. And all these issues impact, of course, also Germany and the European Union. There is what we perceive as a gradual withdrawal of the United States from the entanglements of the Arab world. There is China's increased engagement in the region. There are regional challenges to peace and stability, such as the struggle with Iran and the war in Yemen. There is the ongoing COVID pandemic and its implications on trade, economy, and the way of living. And this made us an organization to focus on three objectives that intersect with German foreign policy in the region. The first is we seek to strengthen the security cooperation between the Gulf countries on the one hand and Germany as well as Europe on the other hand. And to achieve this goal, we encourage bilateral and multilateral dialogue about regional and collective security. By doing so, we also seek to strengthen Germany's and Europe's role in the region as a trustworthy actor. To give you an example, since several years, we gather Europe and Gulfi scholars, experts, and decision makers in workshops on the relations between the European Union and the Gulf to give them a platform to discuss the status, the challenges and opportunities in regards to topics of mutual interest. And one, of course, is security. And by holding workshops, we try to contribute to the goal of strengthening security cooperation and regional security, a goal that is shared with our government. Second, we encourage macro policies that follow the principles of the social market economy. And to this end, we support innovations of small and medium enterprises as a means of the creation of new jobs and of achieving economic prosperity. So we try to stimulate and to support competition and entrepreneurship, especially when it uses sustainable methods and opens educational and employment possibilities for women and the youth. And we support the politics of diversification that is taking place at Gulf. To give you another example in this regard, we organized several dialogue programs for entrepreneurs from the Gulf region and from Germany, for example, one in 2018, where we organized a startup competition and brought young German entrepreneurs to Riyadh and Bahrain to introduce them to the startup scene in the region and get them into the dialogue with their Saudi and Bahraini counterparts. And third, we believe that educated, responsible, and engaged citizens are a bedrock of strong societies and also a vital pillar in withering challenges erupting from regional crises. So taking an interest in societal developments, we encourage initiatives of civil society organizations for positive social change, leading to women empowerment, youth participation, and corporate social responsibility. So we believe in strong societies as a precondition for strong economies, strong nations, and strong states. And to give you an example, what we do in this field, in 2019, we had the opportunity to organize in cooperation with the Kuwaiti organization, IDGAR, a one-week dialogue program for young female leaders from Kuwait to Germany, where they met with German interlocutors from institutions such as the German Foreign Office, the German Parliament, and civil society or organizations. So I hope that gives you an idea of the role such organizations as Konrad Adenauer Foundation can play and how we can contribute to German foreign policy and to its soft power. I hope I'm not running out of time. I would like maybe to add or to conclude with a few.
1 minute, yeah, 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes is hopefully I can do this, because I would like to conclude maybe with a few more explanations on our model in regards to the relation between the foundations and the parties they are affiliated to, and to the relation between foundations and the government, because it makes us somehow unique and it needs some explanation. So on the relation between the foundations and the parties they're affiliated to, I'd like to begin with the core idea of foundations in the German political system, and that is that the German foundations mirror the basic political programmatic streams in Germany. So streams that are covered historically and also today by parties like, for example, the center-right parties, CDU and CSU, the Social Democratic Party, the Green, the Liberal Party, among others. And by this, we as foundations, or let's say the diversity of the foundations, reflect basic structure of our pluralistic system. In Germany, a system with a significant role of parties, a role that is stipulated in the constitution, and the party system is reflected in the most important institution of the German system, and which is the German parliament, where in the federal election, elected parties form factions. And against the backdrop of this party democratic reality in Germany, let's say, the foundations have good links to members of the parliament, members who also shape the foreign policy to a huge extent. We can brief them, we can organize dialogue programs in which they take, among other players of the foreign policy scene, part. To mention two examples. So the advantage of a foundation is that it has access to the heart of the political system, also because we are affiliated to a party that plays an important role. Does this mean that foundations are fully dependent on one party? I would say no, because if a foundation wants to be taken seriously by its own scene, let's say, and also by the public, and if it wants to have an impact, it needs freedom. So there is no need for foundations if they would act like an arm of their party. So it's a mix, affiliated, but not a section or something like this of a party. And the German law also makes it very clear that foundations have to be de jure and de facto independent of parties and have to perform their duties autonomously and with intellectual openness. Also, to close with this, the relationship between the foundations And the government is a mixed one, as we can see when we have a look at the way the foundations are funded. So the foundations receive for their international work allocations from the federal budget that corresponds to the strength ratio of the political parties they are affiliated to in the last legislative periods. And it's the budget committee of the parliament that decides on the annual budget of the foundation. So the foundations receive their funds from Germany's federal ministries after the funds are approved by the German parliament. So the fact that the parliament decides on the budget and funds for the foundations and not the ministries shows the independence of the foundations from the government. We are non-governmental institutions and not an implementing agency of the government, but at the same time, of course, we coordinate closely with the ministries, with the foreign ministry, especially, and with the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. I will leave it here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bloomberg, for this very, as I say, very unusual and unique structure of think tanks in Germany. It's not something which I've seen in any other country. And perhaps there's something, as I say, there for other countries to potentially consider adopting, because perhaps in the discussion we'll see there may be certain advantages that this structure affords the country when it pursues its foreign policy goals. With that, I would like to move to our third speaker, Mr. Jan Hanhap, who is representing CARPO. And CARPO is a young organization, and it's, my understanding, in a separate sphere to the foundations. With that, Mr. Hanhap, could you kindly give us an overview of your activities and how you contribute to this soft power strategy?
Yes, thank you very much, dear Omar, for the kind introduction and, of course, for setting up this, this panel. And I'm glad that my co-panelists, Mr. Ambassador Böckmann and Mr. Fabian Bloomberg, already mentioned some of the concepts and aspects that I'm also going to touch, of course. Before focusing on the role of think tanks like CARPO, for example, please allow me to go a bit more deeper maybe into some of the concepts that have been mentioned so far, that is soft power and public diplomacy, which broaden, I think, the understanding of Germany's soft power strategies in the region. So it has been mentioned already that at the core of the idea of soft power, as Joseph Nye has established it in the 1990s, is the idea that soft power means to get what you want by means of attraction and persuasion and not military force or economic pressure. So it has been defined as based on culture and ideology and institutions. So it's about being attractive and lead by example, and that intangible sources of power come into play, and not like traditional sources like military strength or pure economic power. So when we think about the sources of such soft power, we need to think about what these sources are. And if we assume that soft power is the ability to pursue one's goals by attraction and persuasion, we have to ask, what are Germany's resources that make it attractive, especially in the region at hand, or the region that we're talking about today? And there are many factors at play. On the one hand, it is economic strength. It is being perceived as a leader in technology and science, being perceived, maybe even though it's maybe a stereotype, but as efficient and capable of doing things, but also political values like democracy, the rule of law, human rights, being perceived as civilian power that is strongly dedicated to diplomacy, multilateralism, peace building, also against the background of our own violent history in the 20th century. These all play a role when defining such sources. Also, more recently, as being an environmentally conscious actor with a green agenda, Mr. Böckmann already mentioned this as a key feature of the new government, but also what helps in the region of the Middle East, that Germany doesn't have a colonial past and is therefore often perceived as an honest broker when it comes to dialogues. And of course, it's the features of culture in general, like language, literature, sports even, that are sources of soft power. But then, of course, we have the question how this soft power can be operationalized and managed. And it was already mentioned, like states have a certain toolkit, which is public diplomacy. And it's not the only way of managing soft power, but it's one of the key aspects. And public diplomacy offers the instruments of exercising soft power, can be seen as the implementation of soft power into political actions. And one key aspect of this is that foreign publics are seen as important for pursuing one's own policy goals. So here interests and preferences are shaped and maybe influenced so that in the end, maybe even also the governments act in a way that is in line with the interests of the sending country, in this case, Germany. And of course, it would be an oversimplification of public diplomacy, but it is maybe a combination of political communication, often short-term, ad hoc, and long-term establishment of relationships with relevant actors abroad. The latter often being implemented in the field of foreign cultural policies or cultural diplomacy. So by implementing public diplomacy, an actor like Germany tries to first understand cultures, attitudes, and behaviors. So it has this listening aspect. I think Fabian called it earlier a seismograph of political developments or social developments. Then the second aspect would be to build and manage relationships. And the third would be to influence opinions and behaviors in favor of one's own interest. So this is the background against which also German public diplomacy takes place, and the field of German public diplomacy activities in the Middle East, and thus the exercise of soft power is of course very broad, and I just want to highlight a couple of points that I think are important. So when it comes to the exercise of German soft power in the Middle East, we see a very complex system of different actors involved in communicating with foreign publics, engaging in exchanges and establishing relationships. And this very broad variety of actors, I think, is a very typical German approach to the field. And if we differentiate between short-term, mid-term, and long-term activities, we can see different actors. And often these actors have very, very different self-perceptions of what their role is in the concert of German foreign policy and in how far they believe they are even part of German foreign policy. And I will get back to this in a moment, also when it comes about to intentionality or non-intentionality of being a part and pursuing German soft power goals. So we have short-term activities, and it was mentioned before, like communicating or a day-to-day communication of German foreign policy, giving explanation on domestic or international events, of offering counter narrative if necessary, and it's often like reactive and also related to maybe even crisis. We have midterm activities, and we have the broad field of long-term activities which aim at developing lasting relationships with key individuals, developing networks, and they contribute to building, so to say, the basis for future exchanges and developing strong ties between individuals and Germany as such. And here we have the broad range of German foreign cultural and educational policies with all the different actors like the Goethe Institute, the German Academic Foreign Exchange Service, the Humboldt Foundation, the political foundations, and we heard about their work already, and of course think tanks like ours, like CAPOS, and I will be happy to elaborate on this at a later stage. So in general, a general feature of German foreign cultural policy is that there is a very large number, a very diverse number of organizations at work. And unlike, let's say, the British or the French, it does not have a centralized agency coordinating all the foreign cultural activities. So this is why we find a broad variety of so-called intermediary organizations that actually implement these policies. And again, they perceive, or the distance to government is quite varying among the spectrum. So there is this long tradition of foreign cultural and educational policy and well-established players on the one hand, but it is only since about years that foreign cultural policies was discussed in close connection with clear foreign policy goals and also security-related foreign policy goals. There was this key policy document, which was called the Konzeption 2000, which was introduced and which placed foreign cultural policy squarely into the new foreign policy agenda of crisis and conflict prevention, of human rights and democracy promotion, and expanded the very concept of foreign cultural policies. So this, of course, also had an impact on the approaches to the Middle East. So even more so after 2011 and in direct response to the upheavals in many Arab countries. And it was defined as the goal of foreign cultural policy to help the affected countries to develop into working democracies. And by engaging in what was called dialogue on values, or Wertedialog in German, the German government aimed, at least to a certain degree, in changing the target countries, especially by engaging with civil society. These dialogues include dialogues and discussions on basic rights, the legal system, political participation, and things like this. So the relationship between the broader German foreign policy goals, okay, I will try to wrap up soon, the broader German foreign policy goals and the actors of foreign cultural educational policies have often been an uneasy one, though, because it was criticized at or sometimes criticized that by putting a political agenda on top of the cultural activities means by politicizing or securitizing foreign cultural policies. And so especially the actors in the field are often very reluctant to be seen just as a mere foreign policy tool. And when being in touch, and I've been in expert groups, also advising the foreign ministry, there's always this discussion between these actors and a certain tension in how far they can keep or can emphasize the independence and their way of setting their own agendas. So this is between the intermediary organizations and the German Foreign Ministry, but also within the organizations. The closer you move to the field, the less importance sometimes is given to like the broader and long-term strategic goals of foreign policy. So if you talk to, let's say, a German teacher of the Goethe Institute in Cairo, whether he or she is, well, at the front line of fighting terrorism, you will get a different answer than when it is discussed in the German Foreign Ministry, for example. So we do have this tension, and in general, this leads to, or the intermediary organizations emphasize very much their independence vis-a-vis the German government. And so there is also not like a coherent, centralized strategy on German soft power instruments in the region or worldwide, actually. But this is not necessarily a bad thing, because on the contrary, this individual approach, this more liberal approach gives the individual actors more leeway, and it increases actually their credibility. And in the end, credibility is the currency of any soft power approach. So it can also be, yes, quite important for the approach. I will leave it here. Maybe in the discussion, I can further elaborate on the role of think tanks and what I think will be future components of German foreign policy with regard to soft power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have the Q&A open. If anyone has any questions, and they've started to come into the Q&A, which I'll be coming on to shortly, and the session will be going on to at least 1:15. So we hopefully we'll have time to take all of those questions. I'd like to start with a few of my questions. I'll exploit my role as chairman to pose those. My first question is to Excellency Ambassador Beckman, and this regards the European Union versus Germany in the role of foreign policy. Suppose either in the central German government there is an idea for a new policy position regarding Bahrain, or conversely, perhaps there is an idea from your embassy regarding a policy in Bahrain. How, when this policy is forged, is there a sort of synchronization or coordination with the European Union? You mentioned that Germany cares a lot about multilateralism. It works a lot with France in terms of forging the European Union's positions on these issues. So when you have such an important supranational institution as the EU working, how does this affect the dynamics of producing foreign policy positions?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Rummer. I think we can see that in practice, this works on several levels. Just to give a practical example, during the meeting of European foreign ministers yesterday, very concretely, the political questions regarding posing a challenge to the European foreign policy as a whole were discussed in the region. Prominently the situation in Libya and Syria, but of course also the situation regarding Russia and Ukraine. So this is a very important tool or forum, the meeting of the European foreign ministers. But of course, there are several other layers in Brussels of representatives of the ministries of foreign affairs of the various European member states countries. They meet in regular working groups, the experts which are dealing with several regions. So for example, the Middle Eastern group of Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials meets in Brussels regularly. And on a local level, we are ensuring also the coordination. So when we speak about Bahrain, it's a bit more complicated because we do not have a European delegation in the country. There are in the GCC countries, in Riyadh, in Kuwait and Abu Dhabi, EU delegations, and the relations of the EU delegation with Bahrain are handled from Riyadh. But we have here 3 European member states, Germany, France, Italy, who are there locally. And we coordinate on a rotating basis. Germany held the presidency, the local presidency, until mid last year. And we actually had it at the beginning also of the COVID pandemic. And what we were doing is a little bit what we're doing today, using video conferencing to gather more expertise. And this is why we brought together the ambassadors of all European member states, countries who are accredited in Bahrain, whether they are in Abu Dhabi, in Kuwait, Riyadh, or Manama, for regular meetings, not only among ourselves, but also with interlocutors, most prominently, for example, His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Abdulatif Azayani, who after the signature of the Abraham Accords briefed us on the practical implications for Bahrain. So this shows that we have many layers. They all interact, but we feel that this is also a process which gives us much more expertise than if we would handle these issues as a single country, because we have the possibility to encompass different perspectives from Mediterranean countries to Scandinavian countries, and this is always to the benefit of all.
Thank you for that response. I guess the short answer is there's a lot of consultations and a lot of paperwork must be involved in coordinating. It must be a difficult job, but certainly it's a worthwhile one, because the European Union has clearly been a resounding success in terms of helping to move politics in an international diplomacy in a positive direction. as to when it started compared to when it started. Before I continue with my questions, we have a question from your counterpart, Ambassador Beckman, who is Ambassador Abdul Latif, who is our ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany. Your Excellency, please, and who also, I should add, is a former member of the Board of Trustees of Darasat. Your Excellency, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much. So, thank you, Dr. Omar, for presenting this or organizing this important events. I would like also to thank Ambassador Kane and of course His Excellency Fabian and John, and we have an excellent relation with Conrad and others. Of course, Ambassador, this could be more related a question to the institution, because we know from foreign policy what would be the priorities of Germany when they present, they will be the G7 presidents. So can you share with us what would be the priorities from government side, but more from the institution side? Germany should put as a priority in its presidency of G7 that would, as a pressing issues that should take care of. I know challenges are changing. I mean, we have a lot of challenges. It's not only climate, COVID, what's happening in Europe regarding Ukraine, etc. So, but from an institutional, independent part, what should Germany do it in its presidency of G7? I think I would like to hear from government and thank you again for all the panelists. It was really an excellent forum, and thank you for Darasat for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And before Ambassador Beckman answers, I'd like to remind the audience that Ambassador Beckman is speaking off the record. Please, Your Excellency.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Excellency and dear colleague, for this question. In fact, Germany is now holds the rotating presidency of the G7, and in the framework of our responsibility for G7, we want to work for fair and rules-based multilateralism to solve together the most pressing issues together with our partners G20, but also in the framework of the UN. And I think first and foremost of the challenges is to achieve a sustainable planet. This is very much also in line with the foreign policy priorities of the new German government for this region. Alliances for progress in climate protection. There is an offer of the founding of an open membership climate club, a global climate club open to all those countries who want to engage, who want to come from ambition to efficient action to help to protect our climate. Then, of course, economic stability and transformation. This is in a way the core mission of the G7, to set the signals and better tracks right for economic recovery, financial stability, and sustainable and social and also fair global system of the economy, and taking also working for supply chains which are resilient and sustainable. Third priority, health, of course, on our minds every day, so efficient combating of the pandemic, and to invest also into an international architecture which can protect the health around the planet. We want in general to further and support investment into a better future, the infrastructure, the partnerships on energy, climate development. And finally, but not least importantly, also our initiatives, the G7 initiatives for an open and resilient and fair societies which offer equal participation and the protection of rights for everyone, especially the most vulnerable groups. So these are the G7 priorities, and they, I think, touch very much the countries in the MENA region. So we are hoping for a strong engagement from this region.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I have a question for Fabian Bloomberg. So if we take, as a citizen of a country that is outside of the US and that is influenced by US policy, if I want to influence US policymakers via think tanks, there are many ways to influence foreign policy in the US. If we want to use the think tanks channel, then the mechanisms are pretty clear. For example, contribute to a paper or a study that may be published by a US think tank, which may be then read by a policymaker in the US, or perhaps attend an event and contribute to an event because these events are attended by the policy establishment, and so on and so forth. So in the US, it's a very clear system. They have, I think over 1,000 think tanks in DC itself performing this function on a daily basis. In Germany, is it a similar system, or is there something different? If I wanted to use think tanks to convey a message to the foreign policy establishment of Germany, how would I use a think tank to articulate that message?
Well, thank you very much, Omar, for this question. I hope to answer it with the help of Jan, maybe. If I get it right, then I would say since maybe around 2014, when we had the Munich Security Conference, where we had a speech from our former president, Joachim Gauck, where he was asking, or he was saying to the public that Germany has to take more responsibility on the global stage. And since then, we have a lot of talking in Germany that something like new strategic foreign policy, and we actually need more think tanks in Germany. Actually, we have, I don't know, maybe roughly, I would say around 30, 40 think tanks in Germany that I would call a think tank. Let's say the old ones and also the new ones, if I may say this, like CAPO. And they give advice and they have channels to the relevant policymakers in the different settings or the different streams of the political sphere. So I think maybe something like a mapping would be helpful. I mean, we are often asked, okay, what is the difference between the foundations in Germany? I mean, a similar question could be posed, what is the difference between the think tanks? And I would say all of them have their different history and their different focus areas they are working on. All of them have their contacts and their channels to the government. And if you put this in perspective, or if you could say, okay, this is the whole picture, then you can pick and choose, let's say.
And Jan, did you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, I can echo very much what has been said already by Fabian. I think in comparison to the US context, of course, German, but also even the European context is a bit different with less think tanks so far. But I think the number is increasing, and also more specialized think tanks are established. I mean, CAPO is the one German think tank that is solely dedicated to Middle East and Middle Eastern policies. So yes, of course, think tanks like ours, we do have our connections. We do publish policy briefs with clear recommendations. For example, we are independent. We're an independent institution. So, of course, this is one way of also contributing to the development of policies. I mean, in general, I would see the role of a think tank like ours, like at least in two ways. The one is that the aspect that was discussed already, giving advice, giving policy recommendations on certain issues. And the other one, especially being active in the region, we are, of course, part of Germany's foreign policy and soft power approach in the region. willing or not. I mean, in one way or another, we represent Germany as we are a German institution. And even if we are very critical of a certain policy, maybe, this also reflects variety and also maybe even the ability of Germany to deal with ambiguity and different opinions. So this is also a part of the puzzle of foreign representation. And in our projects, we focus a lot on multilateralism, on engaging in dialogues, just like also Fabian mentioned before, like implementing the very approach of fostering dialogues, facilitating dialogues is in itself a part of Germany's soft power approach. And this is part of our daily work that we keep on implementing in our projects.
Thank you. I have a question from the floor for Ambassador Böckmann from Mr. Rahab Al-Abbasi. Are there any challenges to Germany's soft power strategy in the Middle East? Or if I could rephrase that and say, what are the major challenges? I'm sure there are challenges, but what are the major challenges that Germany faces in executing a soft power strategy?
Yes, in a way, you could even try to turn around this question, because the soft power strategy, if you want to put it as a soft power strategy, is there to address the challenges which are in the region. So it's not actually that soft power is an end by itself, or the instruments which we use, communication, engagement, dialogue, but they are there to tackle the challenges in the region. Of course, the challenges in the region are many. We have conflicts if we of very different nature, like the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, conflicts in Libya, in Syria, where, of course, we see that continuous engagement is necessary, is required, and that solutions can only be found by partners and dialogue. And these challenges are there. And I think we need not only our own or German soft power, we need the combined efforts of our European partners, of other partners, and also sometimes strategic patience to keep being engaged, even when progress is not cannot be really measured within days, weeks, or months. And I think we have this strategic patience also to keep engaged and not to lose hope, and keep working on these issues. And sometimes also we see progress, we see dialogue coming up and developing where maybe we did not even hope for it. And therefore, yes, these are the challenges, and we keep working to tackle them.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Jan on how external issues affect the Middle East, seeing as you're someone here. Your think tank is very much on the ground here. So they're both from Abdulaziz Khattar. We take the issue now going on in Eastern Europe, the Ukraine standoff, and also we have the Nord Stream 2. So these are these issues of Russian-European relations. I'm not interested in terms of their implications for Europe. What I'm interested in is, do these global geopolitical problems, how do they impact Germany's Middle East position? Is this something which affects Germany's calculus regarding Middle East policies, or is it a case of, no, this is an issue in Europe, it doesn't completely separated, no spillover? Do you see any spillover with your work on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, I would assume that any developments around the world cannot be seen completely separate from other world regions. So I would say, of course, these things have an impact also on Germany's foreign policy vis-a-vis the Middle East. I mean, first of all, of course, if there is an urgent crisis like the one in Ukraine, that also means it absorbs a lot of the attention given to other world regions. That is obviously the case. I mean, there are then maybe other crises to come, and of course they absorb a certain attention. But that doesn't mean that Germany's foreign policy vis-a-vis the Middle East and the issues that are pressing and that can be found in the Middle East, that they do not remain important. But for a certain time, they may not be on the top of the priority list. Then on the other hand, I talked about credibility earlier, and how far Germany's foreign policy is seen as credible. And of course, if there is a clear foreign policy in other policy contexts, this is also a source of credibility for policies in the Middle East. So if Germany can act as a civilian power, as a power that can also pursue its interests with more soft power tools, this is also something that has an impact, of course, on the context of the Middle East, I would say.
Thank you. I would like to pose a question now to Fabian. And this regards women's issues. This question is from Hatem Bamehrez. And the issue is, so when you work in the region, let's say in the context of women's issues, you can work with the governments and you can work with NGOs. And both of these things have their limitations. I actually came across the amusing term this week of GONGOs, which is government organized non-governmental organizations, which is non-governmental organizations which are effectively, they're actually government organized, but they pretend to be non-government organized in an attempt to interact with Western policymakers in a certain way. Anyway, in the Arab world or in the region in general, I think there are some limitations expressed by Hatem when you deal with something like women's issues via only those channels. So perhaps you could talk about other alternatives that you pursue when you want to advance, for example, women's empowerment. Do you have an active alternatives to going via the local NGOs and via the governments, or are you constrained with only those options?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, our experience is, or let's put it that way, we have not experienced constraints when working on this issue in the Gulf. I would say, to be honest, the opposite is the case. We are very much encouraged by the Gulf states to work in this field. And our experience with NGOs there is very good. There are more working in the field. They're very professional and they really want to do something. They really want to advance the situation. So, and I mean, our role is that we can facilitate this. We can give opportunities, for example, that we set up dialogue programs, that we engage female leaders also from Europe in the discussion and to match them with Gulfi counterparts. What we can do is that we, in partnership with other institutions, offer some workshops, especially, for example, when women want to set up their own businesses. So, but as I said, my take is that the situation for us working in the field is not that negative.
Thank you. We have a question for Ambassador Beckman from Sebastian Sons, and this talks about development assistance. Now, obviously, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, Germany, with the delay, I believe, received Marshall funds from the US. I believe it was in the early 50s when Marshall funds started flowing to West Germany, and it was able to, and I believe this played a potentially important role in the rise of West Germany as one of the most powerful economies in the world. So the question to you from Sebastian Sons is, how do you value the chance of closer cooperation between Germany and the GCC states in terms of development assistance? And of course, in the case of the GCC, I don't imagine it would be, conventional financial aid transfers because GCC states are quite rich, but what kinds of development assistance, perhaps technical assistance? I know that in the case of Saudi Arabia, for example, Germany has been assisting with vocational education historically in the last 20 years. So what kind of intellectual and human capital and other types of assistance can Germany have with the GCC states?
Yes, with the development assistance, of course, in a way, first of all, the GCC countries, many of them are our very, very valuable partners when it comes actually to give as donors, especially for multilateral organizations, which solve very urgent crises, also crises in the region. We very often see and appreciate very much the support which GCC countries give to provide development aid and humanitarian assistance to countries in this region and other situations. So when we're talking now of transfer of expertise from Germany to the GCC countries, this is not so much in the field of development assistance, but it is rather in the field of cooperation with experts, and very much also driven strongly by a very efficient private sector. So we have now, especially in the field when it comes to expertise for environmental challenges, climate protection, we see best practice models where, for example, technologies being developed in Germany can be implemented in the GCC countries. One, I think, beautiful but not very well known example is wetlands for wastewater treatment. Wastewater which is being produced by the oil. By the oil production, by extracting oil from the ground, a lot of wastewater is being produced. And in the Sultanate of Oman, we have a project where, with German expertise, in a huge wetland area, this wastewater is being cleaned, it's being treated without any resort to chemicals, and creating thus an area which is even a paradise for birds. So these are examples of a very efficient cooperation in the economic field, where, of course, the role of government institutions like the embassy, or also of the which is supported by the government, the network of the chambers of commerce worldwide, they can serve to build bridges, to establish contacts, but it is not so much a matter of development financing for the GCC countries in particular. Of course, there are other countries in the MENA region, large countries, important countries like Egypt, with which we have a very strong partnership in development cooperation, and many projects from environment to agriculture are being implemented with the help of development cooperation instruments.
Thank you. We have 3 questions left. I'll go one for each speaker, and then we'll close the session. So first of all, Jan, a question from Noor Ali, which regards Syria. So currently, Germany doesn't have an embassy operation in Syria. How would you articulate, how would you describe Germany's soft power strategy in Syria? What role could CARPO play? I know, for example, CARPO is active in Yemen, so it has experience working in areas which are difficult and perhaps sometimes beyond the reach of Germany's government. And what kind of support can Germany offer in this regard to countries in that sort of situation?
Well, actually, that's a tough one to be honest. I mean, Syria is a very special case, and of course very problematic and very difficult to engage in this context. I mean, when taking the example of Yemen, of course, we are active in a country or engaging with a country that is in deep crisis and in conflict. What we do is trying to accelerate and amplify voices of experts on issues like development, like economy, to really bring in the expertise that is there in the country and to bring them into also international discourses and make them heard, and to let them discuss the most pressing issues well, come to positive developments in their country. So this is one way of dealing with such countries in crisis. Often these meetings have to take place, of course, outside the country, because it's, for the moment, it is not possible to do it inside. This would be an approach that we follow in Yemen, on Yemen, so that yeah, it's not, because I mean, we had this in the past, that it's often like talking about a certain country without actually engaging the experts and the people on the ground. And this is something that has to be avoided. And we can only see us as facilitators, as providing the platforms for dialogue and exchange, so that solutions can actually be developed from the countries themselves and the people themselves, actually.
Thank you, Jan. And Fabian, a question from Najat Al-Dosari. Regarding health crisis, we have, I pose this question to you because CAS has existed for a long time, has been operating in the region for a long time. So you have experience of the days when climate change and pandemics were hypotheticals. Now you've lived through where they're no longer hypotheticals, they're real. So I mean, how has this affected the future? How these transitions and the accelerating role of technology impact the soft power between Germany and in the Middle East? And on the side, on the technical side, this is my addition. How has it affected how you do your work? I mean, it's been 2 years now in the pandemic. How does a think tank based in the region able to do its work when climate change and pandemics also disrupt your attempts at pursuing your soft power strategy?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I don't think that the issues as climate change, health, technology, new technology is, let's say, such a new topic. I mean, we are working on the topic since several years. It is topics of the soft power, and I think we will witness continuity there, rather than some disruptive measures. I think also that if you have a look at the new government, they will most probably focus more on climate change and also issues of new technologies, but not in, let's say, this disruptive manner. So, but with also very broad and intensive discussion on the topics in Germany, I think there is maybe now a window of opportunity to strengthen our efforts in this regard more. I think what we need is more exchange even between the region and Germany in these topics, and maybe a more coherent politics in Germany, but also between Germany, Europe, and the region. And when it comes to the way we worked during the pandemic, not only for us, but I think for all, also for entities like Derasat and Capo, very tough times where it is not possible to travel, not to meet each other. So it limits the possibilities of exchange, and it limits the possibility to really get into the topics, although it's a pleasure to be in such a virtual panel today.
I should add that these difficulties, I'm happy to report that both you and your colleagues in CAS and colleagues in CAPO were able to visit Bahrain and Dirasat despite all of these challenges. So it's our pleasure to work with such determined and committed partners. And the final question is to Ambassador Beckman from Abdullah Junaid, and it's a tough one. And I remind all those attending this is the ambassador's remarks are off the record. Now, Germany has been perhaps focusing more on soft diplomacy, although you did mention in your opening remark examples of Germany's deployments of hard power, for example, in countering extremism in Daesh, and maybe I believe in Afghanistan there was a German contingent. So is Germany considering converting from soft diplomacy to hard diplomacy in the Mediterranean? Because we're seeing some more tensions in the Mediterranean, and that of course impacts the Middle East region of late.
Well, the challenges there are, we have spoken about them, I think, extensively, and I think our approach can only be not to renounce on what you classified as our soft power instruments to engage in dialogue, in outreach, via our channels of public diplomacy, like the German Information Center and our regional spokesperson, but also, of course, to engage also very closely with our European partners, especially, and with our transatlantic partners and the UK about the challenges. And as I mentioned in the meeting of the European Ministries of Foreign Affairs yesterday, the humanitarian situation in Syria and also the situation in Libya figured very prominently on the agenda. And you know that with the Berlin process, Germany has engaged very with a lot of engagement to bring the parties which have a stake to bring lasting peace and stability to Libya into a process of dialogue and coordination, and we will continue with these efforts. And so therefore, also as I mentioned, the deployment of military forces can in some situations be necessary, and for us there are however strict conditions on it, a parliamentary mandate, and the engagement in the framework of a system of collective security according to its rules. This is the basic framework, and within this framework, I think, as also the long-standing engagement of Germany in Afghanistan has shown, we are not shying away from deploying also these military means if necessary. And therefore, it is a comprehensive foreign policy toolkit with all the instruments, and we believe, especially in partnership with our partners and allies, we can solve these problems.
I very much hope so. I would like to thank our three panelists for an incredibly insightful session. And I personally have been enlightened by having the opportunity to listen to them talking about this unique and important topic of Germany's foreign policy, especially the soft power towards the Middle East. I would also like to thank our participants, those who attended, and including those who took the time to ask questions. And thanks again for our speakers for taking the time to answer them. With that, I would like to remind everyone to follow Darasat and CAS and Carpo and the German Embassy on social media to keep track of all of our latest events and activities, because I'm sure all four organizations will have lots of interesting things coming up in the following weeks. And otherwise, I wish you a good Monday, wherever you may be. Thank you very much.